Okay, so look, it is quite a big room and there are a lot of us, so if you're having trouble hearing us, just grab your chair and come closer and feel welcome to move up the front if you need to. Can you hear me okay at the back? If I start getting too soft, just put your hand up and wave, because we're all kind of soft speakers, I think, so just got to watch that. So, we like to say that we wish that there was a workshop that we could go to, and we've looked quite extensively in Australia and around the world to see if there's like a workshop we could go to that's going to give us all the answers. And if you're here today, you know there's probably no such thing. And one of the reasons for that is that our family members are all unique, and the answers for all of our family members and for our families when it comes to challenging behaviour are going to be unique as well. So there isn't like a one-size-fits-all approach. I guess as a family member myself, I started out looking for strategies, and a lot of families say that's what they want. When the behaviour happens, what should I do? That's the question we're all looking for the answer for. And I guess what we've learned in the last few years is that's probably not the question that's going to get us to the place that we need to be. And so where does that leave us? And how do we get to the place that we want to go? And what are the kinds of questions that are going to help us to get to a better place with our sons and daughters? So what we've done with this workshop is we've asked families who've been part of the side-by-side community. Now you'll hear more about that later, and there's probably some people here who are part of Side-by-Side. Side-by-Side's a group of families that Bronwyn's been building connections with over the last 4 years who will experience challenging behaviours and have had the opportunity to do some learning and to try out some different things and to get to a better place with their sons and daughters. So we said to them, what do you wish that you had known at the beginning? And so that's what we're going to tell you today, what other families have said would be the most helpful information to get started onto a better pathway. So what we'll talk about today, firstly, are some myths about behaviour. So there's some ways of thinking about behaviour out there that we come across often that are just not that helpful. So what are those ways of thinking and how can we recognise them in other people? I'm going to talk about how to understand behaviour. So what are some of the things that are going on for people when they behave in challenging ways? That's a really important question to ask. And then after that, we're going to share, probably after lunch, we're going to share with you some of the workshops and the side-by-side partner program and other things that we've been doing to support families to get to a better place. And there'll be an opportunity at the end to hear back from you about whether you'd like to get involved more and what you'd like to do after today, because we don't want to have a conversation with you today and then just send you off with nowhere to go if you'd like to follow some of the ideas that we talk about a bit further. Does that sound okay? Yep, cool, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to start off with Mythbusters. I really like TV a lot, so I'll try to get as much TV references in when I do talks. So we'll bust some myths to start off with about behaviour. So the first myth is that challenging behaviour is abnormal. And certainly what I thought about my son when he was growing up. I tried to hide him away a lot because he had a lot of behaviours that were embarrassing and sometimes destructive, and I didn't know anyone else who had a child that behaved the way that my child did. And so I didn't think about it a lot that consciously, but I just assumed there was something very wrong with him, and I didn't want people to think badly of him or me, so I tended to hide him away at various times of his life and just try to avoid taking him out. What we've learned in doing this work is that challenging behaviour is actually a very normal part of being a human being, and it's something that all of us do at various times, some of us more often than others. And, you know, even things like the other day, I had a bit of a hard day, hadn't had enough sleep, and I've got 4 kids. Enough said. You know, parents know what that's like. Having any number of children is challenging, but not having enough sleep and having a child or children in the house is a bit taxing, and the day didn't go how it was meant to go. And I actually managed to get through most of the day and behave reasonably well. But at the end of the day, my partner, I think he actually cracked a really bad joke that tipped me over the edge, and he got it. I yelled at him, and I think I may have sworn at him a little at that moment, because the whole day kind of built up and I lost control of myself for a little while. And of course, after that happened, I calmed down and I just thought, gee, I wish I hadn't done that, and he didn't deserve that, and why did that happen? So I am prone to behaving in challenging ways myself when things happen. I also just started having a look on the internet at challenging behaviour in Australians generally, so not people with disability, just for anyone. So one of the behaviours that my son has is that he'll pick at his fingernails a lot, like he'll pull toenails out sometimes completely, but we're going through a stage at the moment where he's doing that a lot, and that's quite difficult. And I'd always been told that was part of his disability. So he has Angelman syndrome, and people with Angelman syndrome pick their nails, and that's just how it is. But when I looked it up, there's actually 2 out of every 100 Australians have that condition, where it's an anxiety-related condition, where you'll pick your nails or bite your nails as an expression of anxiety. So I kind of thought, well, is that his disability, or is that part of him expressing pretty normal human emotion that, truth be told, a lot of us struggle with in modern life? My son also has what could be described as an eating disorder, so he's got really strong compulsions towards food. Again, that's common in people that have his disability, but actually 1 out of every 10 people has an eating disorder in Australia. So I thought, well, that's interesting. We're up to 12% of our population. Then if you look at, people who are aggressive towards others, and then people who self-harm at times, and the other kinds of things, behaviours that people engage in when something's wrong, I got up to more than 50% of people in Australia are behaving in challenging ways at times. And I think if I'd gone on with the research, it probably would have gone much higher. It's actually something that most of us do when things aren't quite right for us. So it's not an abnormality. The difference is that when you have a disability, it's much more difficult to conceal your behaviour, if that makes sense. So for my son, if he sees food, he won't try and hide that. He will go for the food straight away. If he didn't have a disability, he might be a bit more savvy about hiding that behaviour, if that makes sense. So it's not an abnormality. Our kids aren't weird. They're very, very, very normal and human in terms of how they're responding to things. So there's another myth that challenging behaviour happens because you're a bad parent. And I know lots of parents tell us that they've heard this stuff and they've had comments from other family members about how they should just up the ante on the discipline, or people say things to families when they're out with their sons or daughters and things are happening. We can sometimes feel quite harshly judged about our parenting. So it's not happening because you're a bad parent. We'll talk about some of the reasons it's happening today, but we've met enough families who have 4 kids, 3 or 4 kids, where the other 3 kids in the family's behaviour is actually amazing. And it's this one child that's having challenges. They're all being parented the same way in the same family. It's not that the parents are doing anything wrong. So I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. It's not your fault. It's not that you've done something wrong along the way. The third myth is that this experience of shame and guilt and isolation is absolutely unavoidable and it's the only way to go. And I think that's been one of the hard ones for us to challenge. So as a group of families, we've come to understand that it is our child's right to be out in the community, and it's our right as families to be out in the community and to be welcomed and to not be judged, and that we need to find ways of getting out there and maybe educating the community a little more about challenging behaviour so that we can feel welcomed and well supported in our communities. We've done a few things already in different situations around some of the stuff that you can do to build better connections, and we'd love to share those with you maybe in the future if that's something that's of interest to you. But we should know that it's absolutely our right and that our children shouldn't be ostracised and that there are some ways forward to create more inclusive communities for ourselves and for them. There's also the professional or expert myth. So the idea that there's one professional, one expert approach that could help us if only we could find it. And lots of us as families have tried looking for that person. Often we get, I'm getting some nods from the audience, often we get referred to psychologists, for example. We go looking for psychologists or psychiatrists who might have enough knowledge to be able to help us. And many families find that that's not helpful. And now I'm not anti-psychologist, especially not because we've got one in the room today. Very much love Craig MacGyver and his work. He's a keeper. And Craig would say later that absolutely there's a role for psychologists, but it's really the answer. The answer actually is a lot more complex than that, I guess, and we'll understand more about that by the end of the day. So we're really just being aware that one of the reasons for that, if we're saying that it's not an abnormality that people behave in challenging ways, it's a normal thing to do, and it's not the parents' fault, then it kind of opens up these questions to say, well, what needs to change in the person's environment to support them in terms of feeling good enough that they don't have to behave in challenging ways. So that's another one of the reasons why we're not always looking for experts. Myth number 5 is the myth of limitations. And we're hearing from families, even now, that people are making really negative statements and predictions about people with disability who behave in challenging ways and about their potential. So, they're never going to be able to, fit into the community or have a job or go to school until they learn how to behave properly. Lots of us have kids where school's ringing up at 10 o'clock every morning saying, come and take your kid home. There's a huge number of families now homeschooling because they haven't been able to, figure out ways for their child to behave appropriately enough to be included at school. So we also need to be aware of that and that it is a myth and that having a disability or other challenges doesn't mean that a person can't be included, and we need to be raising the bar around that and challenging some of those statements that are made about our sons and daughters. The last myth is that there are no reasons to feel hopeful. And look, we're all very realistic, so all the families that you'll hear from today have lived experience of having a son or daughter who experiences challenging behaviour for many, many years. So we know that everything's harder. We know that sometimes just daily things like going to the toilet or doing the shopping or cooking dinner are really complex and taxing to do. We know there's lots of families that haven't slept for years and years and years. Lots of us struggle to find basic medical and dental care for our family member as a result of challenging behaviour and systems not being able to support them. I think that many of us can struggle to keep our sons and daughters out of the criminal justice system as they get older. Lots of us families lose our jobs and don't have the opportunity to work. I've only been working for about 6 or 7 years now, but for the majority of my son's life I couldn't work because his behaviour meant that he couldn't go to holiday programs, and you can work during the school term mostly, but it's very difficult to work at other times. I'm actually still really shocked at how many families are impacted by this where one or both parents are giving up their jobs, and then there's the added factor of poverty to deal with and financial challenge. So there's a lot of stuff going on for families, and when I say that there are reasons to be hopeful, I don't say it without being very aware of what's going on for folks. But one of the main reasons I think we have to be hopeful is that there is some good work being done in Western Australia at the moment that's mindful of all of these factors for families. Some of our side-by-side families have actually found employment I guess, as part of the process of being supported by Side, and we think that's such a fantastic and important outcome. So we believe that with the right support, that families and individuals experiencing challenging behaviours can thrive and can have good lives and find a way forward. And so that's very much the message that we wanted to share with you. I guess the main thing is to know that even if you are very isolated right now, we as families experiencing this, we actually have each other. There's a whole bunch of people in the room today who get it and have experienced it and are not going to judge you, and we can start connecting, and if we start connecting, maybe find a voice and have influence that makes things get better, not just for us, but also for other families. So that's the end of our myths.